I was kneeling on the edge of the trail with my notebook open on my thigh, trying to sketch this dead pine that had split right down the middle and twisted around itself like somebody had wrung it out. It wasn't even that interesting, honestly. I just liked the shape of it, and the light was hitting one side in this flat gray way that made it stand out from everything else. I remember I had my water bottle tucked under one arm because the ground was damp, and I didn't want to set anything down in the needles. I finished the outline, stopped moving for a second, and heard one extra footstep behind me. Not loud, just one step, a little crunch of grit and old leaves, then nothing. I looked back right away and didn't see anybody. Just the trail narrowing through the trees, then bending off to the left where the pines got thicker. I stood there for a few seconds with that stupid notebook still in my hand, waiting for the normal explanation to show up. Another hiker. Somebody is moving slower than me. Maybe someone who'd stopped too when they saw me turn around. Nothing moved. I told myself it only felt strange because I hadn't heard them walking before that. That's all. But I remember sliding the notebook back into the front pocket of my pack a little more carefully than usual, as I had suddenly become aware of my hands. The part that got to me later wasn't even that first sound. It was how long whoever it was let me keep explaining it away. I hike alone a lot, and I mean actually alone. Not in the way people say that and then tell you they were on some packed trail where there are 10 other cars in the lot, and somebody's always coming around the next switchback. I like the quieter routes. Old fire roads, side trails, and loops that don't have much of a view, so most people skip them. Once you're far enough from the parking area, the woods stop feeling like a place people visit and start feeling like they were there before anybody thought to put signs up. I like that, or I liked it. That day I was in Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, on one of those longer loops that branches off through a mix of older hardwood and dense pine sections. Nothing extreme, just remote enough that you don't get much foot traffic once the morning crowd clears out. I had left pretty early, and by the time I was a couple of hours in, I hadn't seen another person all day. That wasn't unusual. It was one of the reasons I picked that route. I always bring the same stuff. Water, a couple of protein bars, a cheap poncho that crackles too much when you fold it, a first aid kit I thankfully never have to use, and this small pocket notebook I keep for sketching trail landmarks. Nothing fancy, I'm not some artist. I just like stopping when I see something distinct, an old marker post, a weird rock face, a tree struck by lightning, and to making a quick sketch so I remember where I was when I saw it. It helps me pay attention. That's what I always tell people when they ask why I bother. Really, I think I just like having a reason to sit still in the woods for a minute without feeling like I need to keep moving. I was comfortable out there. That's important. I wasn't already on edge. I wasn't one of those people who hate being alone and then force themselves to go anyway. I knew what normal sounded like in a place like that. I knew the difference between wind moving high branches and something heavier shifting at ground level. I knew how far sound usually carries when the air is cool and dry. That's probably why it took me so long to accept that something was off, because each thing had an explanation, and I had enough experience to supply one fast. After I heard that extra step, I kept going. I came to a muddier section where the trail dipped and held water from rain earlier in the week. My own boot prints were clear there, and about 10 or 15 feet ahead, I noticed one of them had been stepped on. Same general size boot, maybe a little wider in the heel, pressed directly over my print like somebody had placed their foot there on purpose. I stopped and crouched to look at it. My first thought was just that another hiker had come up behind me without me hearing them and then passed while I was focused on the notebook. It bothered me that I hadn't noticed, but that still wasn't impossible. Pine cover can deaden sound. If somebody walks carefully enough, you don't always hear them right away. And some people are just quiet walkers. I stood up and looked down the trail again. No one. I actually laughed a little under my breath at that point, because I could feel myself starting to do that thing where your brain wants a mystery more than the situation deserves. I said something out loud, just to hear a normal human voice. I said, "All right, man, that's enough of that." Then I kept walking. For a while, it settled down. Or maybe I made myself think it had. I remember the woods being pretty ordinary after that. A squirrel is tearing through dry leaves off to my right. A bit of wind is moving through the higher branches, but not reaching the ground. The smell of damp bark and that cold pine smell that always reminds me a little of a garage around wintertime. I even stopped once to eat half a protein bar and drink water. I stood there with one foot up on a root, looking at the map on my phone even though I already knew the route. No signal, obviously, but I had the downloaded map. The blue dots still worked fine. I was a few miles from the nearest marked campground, right where I expected to be. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me more aware of how little help there would be if something actually went wrong. Not because I thought I was in danger yet, more because once the thought enters your head, it doesn't leave all at once. It sort of hangs around at the edge of everything you notice after that. A little later, I stopped again, this time because I heard a woodpecker somewhere off to my left and wanted to figure out where it was. I turned my head, stood still, listened. Then behind me, after I'd already stopped, I heard one more step, just one. I spun around so fast I felt the strap of my pack pull against my shoulder. Nothing there. The trail behind me was empty. This time I didn't laugh. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then a minute. Long enough that I started feeling stupid just standing in the middle of the trail staring into trees. I walked back a few steps and looked off the side downhill through a patch of saplings and low brush. Nothing. No jacket color between trunks, no movement. I even called out, "Hey," in a normal voice, not aggressive, just enough to let someone know I'd noticed them. No answer. I told myself it could have been an echo of my own movement, a delayed branch settling. A deer stepped and froze when I turned. The problem was that none of those things quite matched what I'd heard. When you're out alone a lot, you get used to grating sounds without thinking about it. That one had weight to it. It sounded like a person stopping because I had stopped. Still, I kept going. That's the part people always latch onto when I tell them this. Why didn't you leave then? Why didn't you turn around right there? Because there wasn't enough yet. That's the honest answer. There wasn't enough for me to throw out the rest of my day over one stepped-on footprint and a couple of sounds behind me. If I had bailed every time the woods felt a little off, I would have missed half the hikes I've ever enjoyed. So I did what most people do when they don't want to admit they're getting nervous. I started negotiating with myself. If I hear it again, I'll head back. If I see another print, I'll cut the loop short. If I catch up to the person, I'll just act normal and pass them. Stuff like that. The trail narrowed where it ran along a shallow slope. The downhill side opened into a patch of thinner trees, and I could see farther than usual between trunks. I found a good-sized flat rock and sat for a minute to pull the notebook back out. Not because I felt like sketching, really. More because I didn't want to look like I was hurrying. I don't know who I thought I was performing calmness for. Maybe for myself. I outlined an old trail marker nailed to a beech tree. The metal disc was bent in half, hidden by lichen. I remember that because my pencil kept catching in the paper, and my fingers suddenly felt clumsy. Not shaking exactly, just not doing what I wanted on the first try. Then everything around me went quiet. Not gradually. All at once, the insects stopped. The birds stopped. Even the little background leaf noise seemed to flatten out. It was like somebody had put a hand over the whole hillside. I looked up without moving my head much. I could hear my own breathing louder than anything else, and the inside of my mouth felt dry. I waited, expecting a gust of wind, or an animal crashing through, or some obvious cause that would explain why everything had gone still. Nothing happened for maybe 5 seconds. Then all the little sounds started again together. I sat there another minute before standing up. I told myself temperature shifts do that sometimes. A shadow passes over. A predator moves nearby. There's a reason for it. The woods aren't performing for you. They don't owe you a warning, you understand. That explanation worked for a little while. Then I found the next print. It wasn't on the trail this time. It was off to the side, just uphill from where the path bent around a stand of pines. A single deep boot print in soft dirt beside a tree, angled downhill toward the trail. Not mid-stride, not passing through, just planted there, like somebody had been standing still. I don't know why that one felt different, but it did. Maybe because it answered a question I hadn't wanted answered. If there was someone out there, they weren't just behind me by chance. At least once, maybe more. They'd stepped off the trail and stopped where they could look down on it, at me. I stood there long enough that I started feeling the cold through the front of my jacket. I remember rubbing my thumb against the edge of the notebook through my pack pocket, just feeling for it like that would help. My sketchbook suddenly felt childish, like I'd brought a lunchbox to something I hadn't understood was serious. I didn't turn around yet. I should've. I know that now. Instead, I started walking faster, though not fast enough to call it hurrying. I listened harder. I stopped twice on purpose, trying to catch the extra step again. The first time, nothing. The second time, yes. One step behind me, stopping a beat after I did. I kept my face forward, That was the moment I knew I was no longer dealing with coincidence. I didn't need to see them. The worst part was not seeing them. It meant they were choosing that. They were good enough at staying hidden that I got only the part they wanted me to get. A footprint, a sound, silence in the trees. Just enough to keep me aware. Once I accepted that, everything changed shape. The trail I had been enjoying all day started feeling staged. Every bend meant another place I couldn't see until I was already in it. Every denser patch of pine felt like a section someone could move through while I stayed visible on open ground. I caught myself checking behind me too often, then got the stupid thought that whoever it was might be enjoying that. Watching me check, watching me try to act normal after giving up on normal. I hate even saying that because it sounds dramatic, but that's exactly what it felt like. Not like I was being hunted, not exactly. More like I was being observed by somebody with all the time in the world. I pulled my flashlight out before I needed it. Sunset was getting closer, and under the trees it was already dimmer than I wanted. My route was supposed to continue to the loop section, then arc back toward where I'd started. I remember looking at the trail ahead and thinking I had maybe enough light if I kept my pace and committed to the original plan. Then I thought about following a plan that had been made before I understood the situation. That was when I finally decided I was leaving the way I'd come. I didn't whip around and run. I just stopped, took a breath I had to force all the way in, and turned myself calmly back down the trail. My heart was beating too hard for how little I was doing. I started walking the return route, every muscle in my shoulders tight enough that my neck hurt. At first, nothing happened. No step, no movement, just the sound of my own boots and the faint buzz of the woods settling toward evening. I almost started convincing myself I'd broken whatever weird pattern had been happening. Maybe whoever it was had peeled off when they realized I was heading out. Maybe they'd just been some creep who liked making people uneasy and didn't want to risk getting closer. Maybe turning around had solved it. Then the insects cut out again. I looked up across a clearing where the trail skirted an open patch of scrub and dead grass. On the far side, between two trees, there was a person standing still. They were far enough away that I couldn't make out a face. Dark clothes, maybe a jacket, maybe a hoodie, I couldn't tell. No bright color anywhere. Just a narrow human shape planted between the trunks like they'd been there a while. I stopped without meaning to. They didn't wave, didn't call out, didn't shift their weight like someone caught by surprise. They just stood there looking in my direction. My hand was already on the flashlight. I brought it up and clicked it on, aiming across the clearing. The beam hit the grass, then the lower trunks, and then climbed. The second the light reached them, they moved. Not fast. That was the part I still think about. They didn't flinch like a startled hiker, didn't turn and hurry off. They took one slow step backward, then another, sliding behind the tree trunk without ever turning their body away from me. It looked wrong in this simple human way, because people don't usually back into cover like that unless they're very aware of what they're doing. The light caught one shoulder, then a sleeve, then nothing. I stood there with the beam fixed on that trunk so long my arm started hurting. I didn't call out. I didn't go closer. Every dumb idea that might've gotten me hurt burned off in about 2 seconds. I lowered the flashlight, turned around and left. Not running, but close. Fast enough that the contents of my pack bounced against my back, and the zipper tab kept tapping the side pocket. I stopped once to listen and immediately regretted it, because all I could hear was blood pushing in my ears and the faint hiss of my own breathing through my nose. I started moving again and didn't stop after that. By the time I got back to the trailhead, it was almost dark under the trees. The parking area was still empty except for my car. Seeing it should have felt like the end of something. Instead, it made me feel exposed in a new way, standing out in the open with all that tree line around me. I unlocked the car, got in, and locked the doors again before I even took my backpack off. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, flashlight still on the passenger seat, and watched the trail entrance in the rearview mirror for I don't know how long. Long enough for the windshield to start fogging a little from my breath. Long enough that my legs began to ache from being tensed up. Nobody came out. I drove home with the notebook still in my pack. I didn't look at it that night. When I finally did the next day, there was dirt smudged across the page where I'd been sketching that bent trail marker, and I couldn't remember touching the paper with dirty hands. That's not the part that bothers me, though. Dirt gets everywhere out there. It could come from anything. What bothers me is how deliberate the whole thing felt. If that person had been following me quietly for miles, staying just far enough back that I could hear them but never see them? Why step out where I could finally spot them at all? Why let me know for sure? Why do it only when I had already turned around and was close to leaving the forest anyway? I still hike alone sometimes, less than I used to, and not on that loop. I still carry the notebook. I still stop to sketch odd little landmarks when I find them. But now, if I go quiet for too long, I catch myself listening for one extra step that hasn't happened yet. Like whoever was out there only wanted me to know they could stayed hidden longer, and maybe still do. The next one is different in the way bad weather is different from a locked door. You understand it faster, but that doesn't help much. I was belly down behind a screen of dead brush, listening to two men talk like I wasn't 30 yards away. One of them said, "No, I'm telling you, somebody else has already been through here." The other one said something I couldn't make out, lower and faster. Then the first voice again, sharper this time. Then find out who. I had my cheek pressed into frozen ground and could feel meltwater soaking through the knee of my pants. My rifle was under me, not shouldered, because this wasn't that kind of situation anymore. I remember staring at a patch of pale lichen on a rock and thinking in this very calm, stupid way that I had managed to walk into something that had nothing to do with deer season. There was a metallic banging farther in, the same sound I'd been hearing off and on for maybe 10 minutes. Not like logging equipment. Too irregular. Hollow, then solid, then hollow again, like metal hitting metal inside a pit or the back of a truck bed. I didn't know what I'd found yet. I just knew two things. I wasn't supposed to be seeing it. And whoever those men were, they weren't surprised enough by my possible presence. That was the part that really chilled me. They sounded prepared for the idea. I've hunted in northern Maine for years, mostly in the Northwoods region, and if you've never been up there, it's hard to explain how empty some of that land feels once you get off anything. Maintained, not peaceful. I'm empty, working empty. Old cuts, overgrown logging paths, stretches of spruce and fir that swallow sound, frozen creek beds that all start to look alike if you aren't paying attention. You can go a long time without seeing another person, especially late in the season when most people are done or sitting somewhere easier to reach. That's why I go there. I know the terrain well enough that I can move through it in the dark without making a whole production out of it. I've used the same general section for years, nothing officially marked beyond some old posted boundaries and a few remnants from logging operations that haven't been active in ages. No nearby cabins, no maintained road once you get far enough in, no cell service worth mentioning. If something goes wrong, you handle it or you start walking. I was in my 40s by then and comfortable with that. I don't mean careless. Comfortable. There's a difference. I reload my own hunting ammo at home, sit in the basement with the press humming and the radio on low, measuring everything the same way every time. I like routine. I like knowing what I brought, what it does, and what I can expect from it. Hunting alone fit the same part of my brain. No small talk, no guessing what somebody else is going to do. Just you, the cold, and the work of paying attention. That morning had felt normal. I hiked out before sunrise with a thermos of coffee that had already gone lukewarm by the time the sky started turning gray through the trees. The ground was hard in places, soft in others where the frost hadn't really taken. I was working near an old logging path I'd used before, planning to track deer sign through a stretch that funnels down toward a frozen creek bed. Nothing about it set off alarms. No fresh camp, no strange smell, no obvious vehicle noise from too deep in the woods. Then around mid-morning, I came across tire tracks, fresh ones. Not on the main access route, if you can even call it that. These were deeper in, cutting across a muddy section and continuing farther into the woods than any truck had a reason to be. The kind of track that makes you stop because getting a vehicle out there would be annoying, even on purpose. I crouched to look at them and figured what anybody would figure first. Somebody ignored posted boundaries, probably another hunter with more confidence than sense. It irritated me more than anything. I remember actually muttering, "Hope you enjoy digging that out," because one rut was already starting to slump at the edges. I kept moving. A while after that, I started hearing the banging. It was faint at first, enough that I thought it could have been a tailgate or maybe somebody working on an engine too deep in the trees for the sound to carry cleanly. But there was no engine noise with it, no voices, no chainsaw, just this metal-on-metal knock now and then, with long gaps between, like whatever caused it wasn't part of steady work. I angled toward it because I wanted to know if somebody had gotten a truck stuck or was setting up something they shouldn't. Not because I was curious in an adventurous way. more because if another group had moved into that section, I wanted to know where they were so I could stay clear. That decision is the one I go back to. I should have turned around at the tire tracks. Instead, I followed the sound. The farther I went, the less the area looked like anything connected to hunting. The brush had been cut back in places too neatly, not enough for a trail, just enough that somebody had been moving equipment or containers through there. I spotted a section of tarp color through the brush and dropped down without thinking, more habit than fear at that point. Then I saw the plastic-wrapped containers. There were several of them stacked off to one side, half hidden under brush and a tarp that had been tied down low. White plastic, heavy-looking, edges squared off. Not camping gear, not feed. Nearby was a pit covered with another tarp weighted by rocks and scrap lumber. The mud around it had that churned, worked look of a place people have gone in and out of repeatedly. Pale clay mixed with darker soil. I remember that clearly, because the color didn't match the rest of the ground around it. I stayed there maybe 10 seconds before every instinct I had started telling me the same thing: leave. I was easing back the way I'd come when I heard voices, close. I dropped behind the brush and listened to the conversation I started with. One sounding irritated, one lower and harder to hear. The words weren't enough to explain the whole thing, but they told me everything I needed. This wasn't some forgotten dump site or a couple of idiots storing bait where they shouldn't. They were worried someone had already found it. That meant there was something to find. I waited until the voices moved off to my right, then backed out as carefully as I could. No heroics. No, trying to get a better look. I moved slowly enough that every step felt deliberate, then faster once I had enough trees between us. My mouth had that metal taste you get when your body decides before you do that it's time to go. It took me a while to get back to my truck, long enough for my legs to start cramping from how tense I'd been moving. But I made it there untouched. No one called after me, no one stepped out, no shots, no truck engine starting up behind me. I got in, locked the doors, and sat with both hands on the wheel. That should have been the hardest part. It wasn't. Once I started down the logging road toward the highway, I began calming down almost immediately. That's the stupid truth of it. Distance changes your thinking fast. The farther I got from the site, the more ordinary explanations started trying to come back. Maybe it was stolen materials. Maybe drugs, maybe waste, maybe some illegal operation I wanted no part of. Bad enough, sure, but not my problem if I was already leaving. Out there, alone, with no signal, the smartest thing felt like keeping my head down, getting to pavement, and forgetting the exact location as hard as I could. That was the false part. I know that now. At the time, it felt like relief. The road was the usual mess, rutted, wet in places, lined with slash piles and stands of dark timber. My truck bounced and swayed the way it always does on roads like that. I even took a swallow of cold coffee from the thermos at one point and made a face because it had gone bitter. Normal things. Normal little irritations. I was maybe 20 minutes into the drive out when I checked the mirror and saw headlights behind me. Not right on me. Back there at a distance. I didn't think much of it at first. Someone else is using the road, that's all. Plenty of hunters come and go at odd times. But after a minute, I noticed the spacing never changed. I slowed down a little. So did they. I sped up on a straighter section where I know the washboards thin out. They stayed the same amount. That was when my hands started feeling too warm inside my gloves. I tested it again. Came nearly to a crawl at one point where the road bent around a low rise. They matched. I looked harder in the side mirror and saw mud splashed along my passenger doors. Not random road spray. Thicker than that, clotted across the lower panel and smeared higher near the back edge. Same pale clay from the hidden site. I hadn't noticed it before because I hadn't had a reason to look, but once I saw it, I knew. My truck was marked by where it had been. I don't know if that mud got there because I'd brushed too close on the way out, or because somebody put it there while I was in the woods, or if it was just bad luck. I only know I hadn't driven through that color anywhere else. Seeing it made the whole situation close around me in a way it hadn't before. That vehicle behind me wasn't just another hunter leaving late. They had a reason to stay on me. The road out of there is too narrow in spots to do anything dramatic. No space to turn around fast. No shoulders worth using. Trees right up on you in places, ditches in others. And no signal. I checked anyway, of course. Nothing, not even enough to pretend. I kept going. Every option I thought through was bad. If I stopped, I was isolated with one road and a lot of woods. If I kept driving, I was leading whoever it was toward the highway, but at least the highway had other people on it. I remember thinking very clearly, don't let them get you to stop out here. That became the whole plan. The truck behind me stayed back through the last miles of logging road like it had a measuring tape stretched between us. Never close enough for me to see much more than the shape of the lights. Never far enough that I could tell myself I'd imagined the pattern. When I hit pavement, I felt maybe 1 second of actual relief. Then they turned onto the highway too. I took the first gas station I knew would still be open. One of those highway places with fluorescent lights that make everything look tired and wet. There were 2 cars at the pumps and a pickup parked along the side. I pulled in hard enough that my rear end fishtailed a little on the slush. I left the truck running, grabbed my phone and keys, and went inside without even thinking about dignity. The air in there smelled like burnt coffee and old fryer oil. Warm, stale, normal. Best smell in the world at that point. I stood by the window, pretending to look at a rack of windshield fluid, and watched the road. A dark vehicle came past slower than the traffic around it. Not creeping, not enough for anybody else to notice, then kept going without turning in. I didn't get a plate. I wish I had. All I can tell you is it looked like a darker SUV or pickup. Mud on the lower sides, nothing distinctive enough to matter. I stayed at that station a long time. Long enough to buy coffee I didn't want, and drink half of it, just so the clerk wouldn't start wondering why I was loitering. Long enough that my heartbeat finally came down and then climbed again every time headlights slowed outside. Eventually, I drove home because I had to. Nothing followed me that I saw. You'd think that would be the end of it. In a way, it was. In a why, it wasn't. Back home, when I was unloading gear, I noticed one of my rear tires looked slightly off. Not flat, just low enough that I crouched to check it. There was a shallow cut in the sidewall. Clean, deliberate. Not enough to blow immediately, just enough that it would failed later if I'd kept driving. Maybe on a darker stretch of road with nobody around. That's what convinced me more than anything else that I hadn't overreacted. Somebody wanted that truck to stop. Just not where I still had choices. I reported what I could, though I didn't have much. General area. What I'd seen. The containers, the tarp-covered pit, the voices. I don't know what came of it, and maybe that's the part that sits with me worse now. Because I know what isolated places like that are good for if somebody wants time, privacy, and a lot of ground between themselves and any witness. Northern Maine is full of old roads and forgotten cuts and patches of timber that look identical, unless you already know which one matters. I've gone back to hunting since then, but not there, and not without thinking harder about every track that doesn't make sense, every place a vehicle shouldn't be, every metallic sound that carries too far in cold air. I used to think knowing the woods well was enough protection on its own. Now I think it mostly means you notice sooner when something is wrong, and sometimes sooner still isn't soon enough, because the thing I can't quit turning over isn't what was in that one pit. It's how practiced the whole thing felt. The cut brush, the wrapped containers, the way those voices went straight to whether someone else had already been through there, like that was a known risk, not a surprise. And if one hidden setup was that organized, in a region with that many isolated hunting areas and that few reasons for anyone to go poking around off-season, I don't think it was the only one. I think there are stretches of woods people still walk into every fall without realizing somebody else figured out a completely different use for being that far from help. The last one starts in the middle because that's how it lives in my head anyway. I woke up halfway out of my sleeping bag because something hit the side of my tent hard enough to bend the pole inward over my face. Don't collapse it, just shove it in fast and let it spring back. I made this awful choking sound because I'd been asleep with one earbud still in and the other one somewhere in the bottom of the bag, so for half a second I didn't even know what had woken me up. My hand went straight for the flashlight by my pillow and missed it the first time. I could hear the fabric still trembling, that thin, tight sound tents make when they stop moving. Then there was one slow step outside. Not a stomp, not an animal crashing around. A step was placed carefully in the dirt. I froze exactly the way people always say they won't. Every part of me went still except my breathing, which got so loud in my own head, I was afraid whoever was outside could hear where I was just from that. I grabbed the flashlight, clicked it on, and pointed it at the wall of the tent. All it did was turn the nylon bright and flat. No shape, no clear shadow, just my own light making the space feel smaller. Then something dragged lightly across the outside near where my face had been a second before. Not scratching, more like fingertips or a stick moving with pressure and then stopping. Right there, if I'd zipped that door open and bolted, I think about that a lot. I really do. because in that moment I had no idea what was outside, only that it knew enough about where I was lying to stop exactly at head level. Earlier that evening, none of this felt like a good idea. I was in Six Rivers National Forest in Northern California, looking for somewhere to sleep, because every nearby campground I'd counted on was full. Like actually full, not I can maybe squeeze in if I ask somebody. Cars packed in, camp hosts shrugging, signs flipped over, the whole thing. It was already getting later than I wanted, and I didn't have a backup beyond driving aimlessly and hoping. I couldn't really afford to bail to a motel, not without turning a cheap trip into a stupidly expensive one. So when I found a Forest Service road with a few pull-off spots and enough room to get my car out of sight, I told myself one night alone would be fine. I don't like camping alone. That's the honest version. People who do it all the time always act like once you get used to it, the nighttime sounds turn into background. Good for them. For me, they don't. They separate. Every branch pop sounds like it belongs to a different thing. Every little movement feels like something approaching, even when I know that makes no sense. I sleep with earbuds in sometimes just to keep the woods from feeling too close. Not blasting music or anything, usually a podcast I've heard before or white noise, just enough to blur the edges so I can shut my brain off. I know that sounds like a dumb thing to admit in a story like this, because it means I was voluntarily making myself less aware. But that's what I did. The site itself wasn't even terrible. Just a flat patch off the road, no facilities, no ring, no table, nothing official. Dispersed backcountry spot, basically just a place people had clearly used before, because this ground was already compacted, and there were a couple of old blackened stones from a fire somebody probably shouldn't have made. Trees around three sides, the road a little higher behind me, then a slope dropping away in front. I set the tent where the ground looked most level, kicked around for rocks with my shoe, and laid out my sleeping bag, all of that. And the whole time I kept thinking about how I wouldn't have picked that spot if I hadn't felt out of options. That matters. If I'd chosen it because I wanted solitude, I probably would have read every noise differently. Instead, I was there because I needed a place to get through the night, which meant my brain was already in this bargaining mode. You can do it one night. It's fine. People do this all the time. Lock the car, keep your keys nearby, stop being weird. I remember tiny details from that setup in a way that's annoying now. My cheap camp stove sputtering before it caught. The smell of instant noodles because that was all I could be bothered to make. The zipper on my duffel is snagging on a loose thread. One of my earbuds falling in the dirt and me wiping it on my shirt before putting it back in. Ordinary stuff. The first thing that felt wrong happened right before bed, and I explained that away too. The insects stopped. Not faded down, stopped at the same moment, like somebody cut the sound on a video. There had been this steady, dry buzzing around the brush, and then it was gone. I was crouched outside the tent, brushing my teeth with a water bottle in one hand when it happened. And I remember holding still with foam in my mouth like that would help me hear better. I looked up at the trees, then at the dark slope below camp. Nothing. I told myself the temperature had dropped hard after sunset. That's a real thing. I know that. Air changes fast in the woods once the light goes. I spat, rinsed, got in the tent, zipped it up, and pretended not to notice how quiet everything stayed for another minute or so before the bugs started up again. I put one earbud in and left the other out at first. Then I put the second one in too. I don't know why that feels embarrassing to say, but it does. Like I was trying to wallpaper over a bad feeling instead of dealing with it. Anyway, I fell asleep eventually. Not deeply, obviously. The kind of sleep where you're aware every time you turn over. Then, sometime around midnight, or what I assume was around midnight because my phone later showed it had a little under half battery left, and I'd gone to bed not that long before, I woke up to footsteps outside the tent. At least I thought they were footsteps. Slow ones. They circled, but not in a normal walking rhythm. That's what got me. It wasn't step, 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 steady around the tent. It was more like step, drag, pause. Then two lighter ones. Then nothing for long enough that I'd start wondering if I'd imagined it. Then one heavier placement somewhere near the foot of the tent. I pulled one earbud out and listened harder. Same thing. I told myself, animal. Of course I did. Deer. Raccoon. Something was sniffing around after food, even though I hadn't left anything out. But animals commit to their movement differently. Even when they're cautious, there's still a pattern that belongs to a body doing one thing. This felt like something adjusting itself, thinking between movements. I turned on the flashlight and unzipped the mesh just enough to shine it through the outer door panel when the sounds moved to the side opposite me. Nothing there. The beam caught dirt, a couple of pine needles, one low bush, and the pale side of my own car farther back through the trees. No legs, no animal eyes, no person stepping away. The ground around the tent was soft enough that if something that size had been pacing, I should seen some sign of it, even in weird light. I waited. Nothing. I zipped it shut again and lay there trying to decide whether I was more scared of staying still or of making noise. My mouth had gone dry in that instant way where your tongue suddenly feels too big. I could feel my heartbeat in the pillow under my ear. Then there was movement again on the other side this time. Same slow, uneven circle. I grabbed the knife I'd brought for absolutely normal camping reasons, opening food packages and cutting cord. And all the stupid things you tell yourself a camp knife is for when you're alone and don't want to feel silly. Holding it did not make me feel less silly. It just gave me one more thing to keep track of, with hands that weren't cooperating right. The movement went around twice, maybe 3 times. I don't know. Time got bad in there. Every pause stretched so long I started thinking it was over, and every new sound felt like the first one again. At one point I worked up the nerve to blast the flashlight through another panel, and then quickly unzipped the outer layer enough to look. Again, nothing obvious. What I did see was disturbed dirt, kind of scuffed, but not footprints. No clear tread, no clean edges, just marks where the top layer had been shifted around. That should have made me feel better if it were an animal, but it didn't. It made me feel like the thing making the noise wasn't staying in one shape long enough for my brain to settle on it. And before anybody says the ground might have just been too dry or too hard, no, not really. It was loose enough around the tent perimeter that my own shoes had left clear prints when I was setting up. I remember thinking, if this is a person messing with me, why aren't there tracks? And if it isn't a person, why does it keep stopping where a person would stop? That's when the side of the tent got brushed near my head. Very lightly. I had rolled a little lower in the bag by then without meaning to, and something moving outside traced across the fabric and halted exactly where my face had been earlier. I don't mean the side of the tent in general. I mean one specific spot at head height if I'd still been lying how I started. I pulled back so fast I hit the rear wall behind me and the whole tent shivered. Then total silence. The kind where you start noticing your own pulse in your gums. I sat there holding the flashlight in one hand and the knife in the other, not using either for anything. My phone screen said a little after 2 in the morning when I finally checked. I thought about the car constantly. It wasn't far, maybe 20 feet, maybe less. I could have made it in a few seconds if nothing had blocked me. But making it in the dark meant unzipping the door, crawling out, standing up, getting bearings, finding keys, getting in, and then what? Driving a rough forest road, half awake and panicking. If somebody was actually outside, all they'd have to do is be between me and the driver's door for 1 second. So I stayed. I stayed because the tent was a pathetic cover, but it was still a boundary. Thin fabric, dumb zipper, a little pocket of space that was mine. The car was safe if I could reach it. The tent was safe because I was already inside it. That difference chose for me. I kept both earbuds out after that and just listened. There were long stretches of nothing. A branch ticking somewhere farther off. Wind was moving high up and not reaching the lower air where I was. Once I heard what could have been tires very far away on the road, but it faded so fast I couldn't tell if it was real or one of those noises your brain makes when it wants a normal explanation badly. Enough. Then came the worst part. A shadow moved across the tent wall. I don't mean a crisp silhouette like in a movie, just this passing darkness against the thinner panel, where a little moonlight and my own flashlight glow were making the fabric slightly translucent. It crossed from the front angle toward the side where the ground sloped down. Too tall, too narrow too. For a second, my brain couldn't fit it to the hillside outside. The slope should have changed how anything was projected onto the tent. Trees had already made broken shapes all over the fabric. But this thing moved like it was upright and close, and the proportions were wrong enough that I actually forgot to breathe. Then it stopped, exactly when I held my breath. That made me stay still in a way nothing else had. My chest started aching almost immediately. But I didn't move because some terrible part of my brain had decided the thing outside was keying off the sound of me, not just the location. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Long enough that little sparks started showing up in my vision. When I finally took the tiniest breath through my nose, the shadow did not move again. I did not sleep after that. I sat in that bag until the fabric around the tent went from black to charcoal to that washed-out gray that passes for dawn in the woods before actual sunlight hits anything. My hands hurt from clenching the flashlight and knife for so long. Every time a bird started up somewhere nearby, I jumped a little because my whole body had gone beyond scared and into that stiff, shaky place where even good signs feel wrong at first. The second daylight reached the trunks around camp, I moved fast. I unzipped the tent, stepped out, and did that quick all directions look people do when they already expect to see someone watching them from just outside the frame. Nobody there. No person. No animal. No car I hadn't parked. The trees looked completely ordinary, which honestly made me angrier than if I'd seen something running off. I packed without eating, without using the stove, without even rolling the sleeping bag tightly. Stuff went where it fit. I wanted out. While I was yanking stakes, I saw the dirt. The ground around the tent had been disturbed in a rough circle, scuffed in several places, brushed in others, like something had moved around it repeatedly through the night. But there wasn't a single clear footprint anywhere around the campsite except my own from setup and the messy ones I was making packing up. No tread pattern, no heel, no animal track either. Just that broken ring in the dirt, especially near the side where the tent had been hit and near the panel by my head. I stood there staring at it way longer than I should, keys in one hand, tent stake in the other, because my brain kept expecting one clean piece of evidence to pop out and solve the whole thing. A boot mark. A paw print, something. Nothing did. I threw the gear in the car and left immediately. I drove too fast on that forest road, slowed down only when I had to, and didn't stop until I was back somewhere with a vending machine and a bathroom and people walking around carrying coffee like the night hadn't happened in the same world as their morning. I've tried to be reasonable about it since then. Maybe it was a person messing with me. Maybe it was someone moving around camp in a way I couldn't track because the ground was loose in some spots and matted in others. Maybe the shadow only looked wrong because of the tent fabric, the slope, and the angle of my flashlight. Maybe the thing that hit the tent was a branch pushed by the wind, even though there wasn't enough wind anywhere else to support that. I know how badly the brain wants a shape it recognizes, but there are still details I can't fit anywhere. The way the insects stopped all at once before bed. The way the movement outside seemed to change pace depending on whether I was listening. The fact that something traced the fabric right where my face had been and then never made that same mistake again. Most of all, the ground in the morning. If there had been one clear footprint, I think I could filed the whole night away as a human being doing something cruel in the dark. Instead, there was disturbed dirt circling the tent over and over, and not a single clear footprint anywhere around the campsite.